Ms. Kimball, would you call the roll,
With
please?
pleasure, sir. Okay, Mr. Castillo,
Here.
Ms. Carney,
Present.
Mr. Lawrence.
Here.
Mr. Sharp.
Here.
And Mr. Webb.
Here.
All right, thank you. Would you all rise and join me in a reconfigured flag location in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Thank you. Now we will have the old agenda here. Now we will go to public comments and requests in advance of our closed meeting. So in accordance with School Board Bylaw 2.30, the time for each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Additional written statements may be submitted to the clerk for dissemination to board members and for the record. Does anybody have any comments this evening?
I'm just here to listen.
All right. That counts as a public comment. Thank you, Melissa. All right, with that, we now go into closed meeting. Would somebody
Can I ask a
move us?
question?
Yes, Ms. Carnes.
Since we have our student liaison here and some folks to watch the meeting, could we move close to the end of the night and as opposed to the beginning of the night? That way they wouldn't have to wait on us?
That is a statesman-like proposal.
It's my last one.
It's your first one.
Thank you, John. Can always depend on you. I'll miss that.
So I would entertain a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
we have a second? All right. So we shall move the closed meeting and make that the new item 8? Well, it will become, we'll put that after, well, we'll just put it at the end of board and student liaison comments. Okay, all right. So that now puts us into, well, first of all, we should adopt our agenda
I move that we adopt the agenda.
as amended. Thank you. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Very well. Now we come to recognitions and reports. Dr. Jones, have we any?
Not tonight, thank you.
All right. Consent agenda. Going to have to wait on the consent agenda.
Yes.
Unless nobody has a question about it.
But that's part of closed.
I mean, if nobody has a question about that item, we could go
That
ahead
is
and-
true. Does anybody have a question about the items in the?
No.
Okay.
All right, I
So-
move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you very much. Now we come to the next item of our agenda in our business section, action and information. And we begin with our budget guidance discussion.
He turned it on just now.
Yeah.
It just now came on.
That's why I wore something heavy, because I knew what I was getting into.
Yes.
We are coming up to budget season.
Yes, we are.
And we have had some meetings with Mr. LeCondre and with City Council, and there are some prognostications that have been made, and in that light, it has been our practice in years past. Last year, we gave guidance to Dr. Jones and ultimately asked her to provide scenarios that would lay out what some of the potential trade-offs would be. We are holding today some budget guidance discussion so that Dr. Jones can get a sense of what the board's thoughts are as she and her team, including but not limited to Mr. Kimball, prepare the budget. So with that, Dr. Jones, how's it looking? What are the parameters that we find ourselves facing?
Well, and it feels very similar to last year, actually, in that when the first number we heard was around 5%, which was probably, what, about 2 months ago, maybe, the first time we talked about that with the city. And then at the meeting that we had in our budget discussion, it was 2.3%. 2.3 would be, a challenging budget in that it gives us an increase of $880,000. And of course, it's early, so things can change with VRS and healthcare. Some of those things are plugged in estimates right now. But when you're looking at that, some of the cost drivers for us this year, special education tuition alone needs an additional $245,000 in the budget. As you know, that anytime we have a student who is outplaced, the cost usually ranges anywhere from $60,000 to $100,000 for one student. We do have a portion of that gets picked up, but our special education population is growing as well, like all of the rest of our population. And we're making it work this year, but it is not easy. Arlington Career Center, we need another additional $80,000 in the budget just for Arlington Career Center. Our numbers are growing with our students in 9 through 12, but again, the real cost driver is that for the first time, we're seeing students who are in transition, which is that 18 to 22-year-old period, and they're needing a transitional program, and it's about $35,000 per student. So just 3 students, you have that additional $100,000. And then, of course, the governor's school tuition continues to go up. So half of that increase at 2.3 are just those 3 items. And then beyond that, it would be being able to try to fund a couple of what we think are critical positions. We need 3 elementary teachers at TJ this year, or we will be over policy. And that's just where we are running right to the top of our policy every year, which is what I think you want us to do, because that's efficient. And I actually was very not thrilled, but with Washington Post, it looked like our class sizes were large because we were the highest class size, but that's because we were at policy. And some of the other ones were not. So that means we're utilizing our staff really, really well. We also need 2 special education teachers, and again, that's mandated. In order to have the numbers and the ratios that we need for special education. That's pretty much a 2.3. That's it. So I just think it's important for the school board to know, are we talking about a 2.3, which is no salary improvements, no additional staff in any of those ancillary, which we always have requests for, and we know that's the case, whether that's, gifted or music or PE or just anything. So that's what a 2.3 looks like. I think if you were asking Hunter and I what we could do, that's really where we should be, that's still tight, it's around 5 to 5.6. And that really depends on, are we going to put in a bus, or are we going to wait like this year and maybe have to do a bus right before school starts because those 88 children show up all at the same time that could show up, before September. So that's really where we are. The range is really down low, is 2.3 and kind of 5.5, 5.6, somewhere in there, but it looks different according to what we can do.
Merry Christmas. Any questions?
5.5 or 5.6 includes our plan for increasing compensation for our teachers.
It's still early because we have all winter break to work, but I can tell you, we're watching our neighbors. And so what we would actually propose would be a little bit different this year, and I'm not saying it will be well received, but we want to recalibrate the scale, because in Arlington, and I say it won't be well received because our teachers like a traditional model, even though we haven't had that the last 2 years, but our scale, we've closed the gap really, really well. And if we recalibrate the scale, what it means, if you're on a step 15, you'd still be on a step 15, but there are still raises all the way across the scale. It's just this one may be 0.5% and this one may be 5%. It depends, again, where you are in the scale. But by doing that one more time, we would have closed all of our positions. We would have 6 out of the 116 different steps within 3 to 5%. It's actually 4.9. So, which is really what we've been talking about the last 2 years. So that's doable if we're in that range. And maintains class size across the school district.
Other questions? Mr. Lord.
I just want to make it clear, you started by saying a few months ago the increase was 5. and now they're saying 2.3.
Well, it's really not that they change. They try to be good to us and give us kind of backdoor estimate, what's revenue looking like? And when you're talking about it in October, it looks different sometimes than it does in December. So I think they try to be as fair as they can to be able to give us an estimate, but that's all it is. And sometimes it stays like this, and sometimes it changes. And this year it's changed, not for the good.
Well, but my question is, was the 5 overall revenue growth for the city, or was the implication the schools could get a 5% increase? Because the 2.3 is not a 2.3% revenue growth for the city. Isn't that taking the growth and splitting it and saying we can get 2.3 pretty much?
Essentially, because the transfer to the schools is about half of the revenue, that either way you look at it, it's increasing 2.3, and so if it is, and what was talked about last week was, and was just thrown out there by Mr. LeContre, it was in a theoretical sense was
several slides.
if you split it right down the middle, what it looks like,
And that's the 2.3.
and that would be the 2.
Right, that's what I'm trying to get at,
Yeah.
because it almost seems like the 5 you're talking about is one thing, and the 2.3 is half of something that is like the 5. But it sounds like we were told you could get a 5% increase a couple months ago, and now you're only going to get 2.3, and I don't think it's quite that
Well,
clear.
where the 5 came from is that we had a budget meeting with
That was actually not fairly recent.
over with the city hall with their budget and finance committee, and Mr. Duncan had thrown out the idea, having been a veteran now of a number of budgets, of trying to avoid the March-April scenario of, oh my God, putting stuff in, taking stuff out, leger demand, realistic expectations, and proposing to say up front, what does a fair, modest increase look like that would meet the needs, and can we agree on that up front? The number that he threw out was, for example, 5%. And honestly, Mr. LeContre, his earlier this summer and earlier this fall, his projections were much more optimistic. They were in the 5 to 6%. And then, as Dr. Jones says, the information came in, especially in terms of the assessments and where they were going. And he does also do regional comparisons. And he said this seems to be the trend for the entire Northern Virginia region. And so, the assumptions got tightened up, and honestly, at the Budget and Finance Committee, when Mr. Duncan threw out the 5%, Mr. LeContre was talking 3.5% at that time.
Okay, but the overall growth
Yeah.
projection for the city is what?
It's 3.5, right? Or is it 2.3?
It's the revenue is 2.3, and here's the thing: that's not necessarily the growth, but what Mr. LeContre did is the growth was more than 2.3, but there are certain expenses, debt service, and fund balance issues that have to be addressed and taken off the top before anything else is dispersed, and that's where the 2.3 comes from. I think it was like 3.5, something like.
I think it's 3.5,
It's
actually.
3.5.
And then you need also to distinguish between growth of the existing pie and the new properties coming online to the pie. And so is all of that rolled in there as well to that number, or is this static, assuming what's here and not what will be opening up starting in early 2016?
They did project the new developments coming online, because that was the first time they've done it. They've always said they wouldn't do it before, but they did this year. The
Well,
numbers we saw.
but what they said was, because I asked that question, they basically said if the project's far enough along that
Yep.
you know it's going to get
Right.
completed, as
Yeah.
opposed to if something was just approved and not started. So, yeah, I just wanted to make it clear, because it almost sounded like they told us 5, and now it's 2.3, and it would just look like the city didn't know what it was doing, and it just
Right.
Gotcha.
wasn't
Right.
that clear cut.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll still have a fight, but, when
Well,
we're
and
fighting that.
and Tony and I have talked about this, and really, nobody has told us anything officially yet. Just in terms of, Mr. LeContre was simply presenting very, discrete, objective, information in terms of you know, everything else being equal, this is where we're going to be a year from now.
Right.
Based on a quarter's worth of information.
Right. Thank you.
To go from 2.3 to 5.5 would more than double the number, right? So,
Well, you go from 80 to, as it stands today, to 1.9.
right, so that would completely absorb what's available to the city under a no tax rate increase scenario, right?
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
until they run their numbers, we do know, and Wyatt mentioned this the other night, that they'll have about, if they stayed flat, they would still have an additional $500,000 in their budget because of savings on their city retirement. We have such small city retirement, we don't see a lot of that, but they will in their budget. So if we were both flat, they would have additional where we would not. So that hasn't been factored in yet, so that offsets it a little bit.
But I mean, bottom line is, you're right. Right now, that's where we're starting from.
So just to be clear, the items, the three things, the governor's school, special ed needs, Arlington Career Center, 2 new special ed teachers, enrollment, accounting for enrollment growth, and bearing in mind we lost 10
Yes.
headcount last year. Basically getting no farther ahead or no farther behind, sort
That's
of
correct.
maintaining a maintenance budget. That translates to your 5,
2.3.
that's everything. Well,
You're-
and then the teacher salary.
If you, once you add that component in, you're at that 5%. And it has a couple of other positions that are, we've already weeded everything out. And so the additions that you would have at 5%, trying to see what else we got before it hit the cutting floor. We would like to be able to add this year NYP coordinator. We think it's really important trying to connect middle and high school. And our staff have said that, and we feel like if we don't, we may lose our IB coordinator at the high school because it's just so challenging right now handling both of those. So if we were 5%, that would be in there because we feel like it's a need. We're trying to add a little bit of help in communications, which we've talked about the last 3 years. It's in, but it would be at 2.3. It's just can't compete with the mandated things. Those are really the big things that are still in. And of course, we have the small drivers that, I mean, they're not huge increases. They just all add up. Like our telephones are going up, our office rent goes up. So you'll see all of those
Fixed
things
costs, yeah.
reflected. Yeah.
How does something like legal costs fit in?
They were actually addressed this year. There would be, in the school board cost center, approximately $60,000 to $70,000 to cover legal services. Should they
We
be
had a
needed.
transfer to add for covering legal services.
From the contingency.
Correct, right.
So going into the succeeding year, does our experience from this year call for a change in what we should look for in legal expense?
Generally, I would say no. I think it very much depends on what comes down the pike between now and the end of the school year. Since we've had Tom's position, we've actually had a lot of cost savings in that area, and especially in special education, or even on some of the areas where I would have to make the phone call and an attorney had to explain to me what he was trying to say in English, where Tom can call and probably have the same call that would take me 30 minutes, he can have in 5. So, I mean, we've had, I think on the hourly rate this year, we've just had some items that have a cost to them, and if those items should continue into next year, we will be in the same boat, if not more. I hope that they don't, because this year right, I mean, just even Mount Daniel alone, the $150,000 for that construction is not a usual expense for us.
And it's interesting, when I've gone back and looked longitudinally at legal expenses from one fiscal year to the next, it seems to be a category that we either we'll spend like $12,000 to $15,000 a year on it, or we'll spend $150,000 a year on. And usually it'll be low, 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 and then there will be an event or a number of events, and then things will calm down for a while, and then.
Well, and the great thing
Sounds
is we're
like
not
you need a
paying for
legal
policy.
services reserve.
You know, hence the contingency. Yes.
I will not vote for that. But just in terms of approach
Yeah.
to how you ferret this out, I'd be more comfortable with an approach that instead of putting the compensation plan at the end of the train, try to put it on every car of the train, if that makes sense. Where you're probably going to have to shave off things in several different places, but don't put the compensation plan in a spot where that entirely gets shaved off. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think at the 2.3, Mr. Sharp, the problem is the other items we have to have, and then there's, if we ended up at 2.3, and we're always looking to shave things off, but we're reaching a point where there's not much more to really shave off, and I think that's part of the struggle, because we haven't added in any of our support staff in the last at least probably 3 years. So we have the same maintenance team we had with a lot less kids. We have more square footage, and, we're just starting to hear, we heard from them last year, but we're just asking everybody to do so much more. And there's not a lot left, but we're continually, we literally go through every position and make sure they all are, have value. And
in terms of, various compensation, alternatives, Dr. Jones and I have, and Ms. High have looked at, a range of scenarios, at which, range from, like, for example, with the teachers, implementing year 3 of the plan, just as the board had discussed it 2 years ago, to something that's very, very much more targeted, looking at those hot zones in the center where we're really, there's a big difference with Arlington. So we, there are, and we've set up the tools in order to, to do this.
You're
So
running a
so
zillion
there
lists.
are, there are
Right,
ways
you've
to look at
adjusted
it.
your targets, but you're still
Yeah.
at a point where you're going from 2.3 to 5.5.
Well, and when 85% of your budget is in salaries, even a 1% change to that carries a large price tag with it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I think for me, because, we changed the policy last year because it was the first time we presented scenarios. And it was to give the board the flexibility to say to me, in this kind of difficult budget year, do we want scenarios, or do you want me to just tell you what we think we really need? But I'm also very cognizant that in the community, I think, we have a lot of capital projects coming down the pike. I just want to be sure that I'm very mindful of what I present. So it was helpful for me to hear from the school board.
Were the scenarios last year helpful in terms of a starting point, or?
So I've always thought it was really important, and I know some people disagree, for the superintendent to present at least one alternative that the community understands is what it really costs
Right.
to run an excellent school system. Now, the board may choose to do something else, but I think that kind of approach where you constrain yourself before you even present to the board is not transparent to the community.
Right.
They should understand what it takes to run a school system. Now, the board can make tough decisions and cut back, whatever. So I would encourage that you present a 2.3% or whatever the number is by the time you get around to it, because it switches out sometimes. A scenario that's like, this is what's required
Right.
to do what we need to do. Still with a long list of unfunded things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I don't know if anything in between or whatever, but I think it's important the community to understand what it really costs to do this.
Other thoughts?
I would probably agree with something similar to that, to put out there the bottom line, what it costs to fund everything, and then we can kind of work from that point forward of what to add in, take out, or what from that point forward of the budgeting process. I will say, though, I did think the scenario that we did last year were at least helpful for me.
They were,
They were very helpful, I think, to kind of have some options and a range of things to put in, pull out, and kind of have some things to look at and see, to have some different options and scenarios to do some different things. I thought it was helpful last year.
Mr. Sharp?
I agree, the options are helpful. I just, I think there are instances where there may be some things sitting outside the list of things that are in the options. But that's really up to us, up to the public to say, well, what about this? And in some cases, I know, I think, at least I did not ask for enough detail on some of the things that we've had expenses on this year. And they've come back to, to say that we should have known that this was part of what was happening. And we should have at least had a chance to salute it or not. And so I'd just say, I would hope going forward, we'd be careful to see what is kind of the components underneath some of these larger items that don't necessarily reveal themselves on the broad description of that subject.
Mr. Charpentier, any thoughts?
I'm not an expert on this, so I wouldn't know.
Okay. Mr. Lawrence?
And I like the way we've done it, where Tony gives us her honest assessment as to what she needs, knowing she's not going to get it all. And then, look at what the city says we should be allowed to spend, and then we work it out from there.
And of course, it bears repeating that we have to keep the work plan in mind as we build the budget, and the budget needs to be able to meet the requirements of what we seek to do. And if that's not the case, you need to tell us that. I think, for my part, the scenarios are useful and helpful. They give us a sense that there are options. I think, the more that we can also educate the community about the fact that our role in the local government context is a little different, and that we do have to take all comers. We have things that happen, enrollment growth, mandates that aren't discretionary. We have to do certain things, and I think the more we can explain that aspect of things, that would be helpful as well in the budget. So, all right.
I'm sorry that Margaret isn't here this evening. I think one of the factors here is what happens down in Richmond. And she's kind of our lead person on that score. I think our legislative package has some requests in it for increases in funding, and in some cases, defensive items that say, don't do away with the cost of competing.
Right.
Or slice it back. But I would hope that there are other things that our neighboring folks are planning to request that we might also support. The Fairfax, most recent article I've seen there is Fairfax is expecting some 50 million shortfall. They, not sure where it's going to come from. And I'm anticipating they're going to be looking to obtain some of that at the state level.
Well, and at the legislative breakfast last week, they did say they expected the governor's budget to have more money for education. But then it comes down to with the LCI, how much would we actually see? But still, there was actually talk of more money for the first time since I think I've ever gone to those breakfasts.
Hunter, In your experience, have they done what, a request such as is in the package about, instead of having a maximum .8, you have a maximum .7 essentially? I think that's one of the requests that we're making.
It's, I mean, these ideas get discussed and floated around. It's, and honestly, it's been discussed to raise the composite index to 0.85 or 0.9 as well. In those cases, fortunately, it hasn't gone anywhere. In terms of new.
So we haven't seen it adjusted in that fashion?
No,
In the time period that the index has been in effect?
No, sir, it has not. It has that 0.8 has been the ceiling since the late 70s, early 80s. And in terms of as Tony said, as we're putting the budget together, we're making some assumptions about state revenue, and are anticipating additional sales tax revenue because of student numbers and just general growth, but also because this will be the first year of a new biennium, that in terms of the money for education for the Department of Education, this is the year that they will go in and they will, for lack of a better word, recalibrate. We'll look at and update the salary information, the student information, the cost information. And so just given, inflation and the spending patterns of school divisions over the past 2 or 3 years, there'll be additional money, for those things, just out of necessity.
You might want to clarify, too, what it means in reality when the governor says, I'm putting money in the budget to grant teachers a 2% pay increase.
In fact, and we discussed that, and generally speaking, when we see something like this, what happens is, say for example, a 2% improvement for teacher salaries, okay, and for the state, for the Commonwealth, it would be a match. So the school division would have to provide that in order to get those funds. Those funds would only be provided for the positions that the state recognizes through the SOQ, which is probably about 60% of the positions in our school system. So 60% of the teaching staff on those salaries would be 2%. Now, and it wouldn't be the false church salary that would be calculated on. It would be the weighted linear average salary, which is probably about $20,000 less than what our average salary is. And then after all that's done, then it gets run through the composite index, and we get 20% of that, which equates basically, I was telling Tony, honestly, it'll be about $40,000.
It happens every time.
Thank you, Mr.
Well,
Sharp.
that's
Merry Christmas
depressing.
again.
The hits keep coming.
Sorry.
All right, any other thoughts on this, or Tony, do you feel you have
Sure, I do. I feel much
guidance
better.
going forward?
General question, though, what you just ran through that scenario, would that be most Northern Virginia jurisdictions with this, what the governor's talking about, of this pay increase?
It would, because most Northern Virginia jurisdictions are generally, 0.8 or close.
If you call Northern Virginia, Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax, and Falls Church. Yeah, it's, when you talk about LCI, like at
I
Region
know
4.
going out towards, which makes
Yeah.
no sense, Loudoun is kind of outside of it, but yet they have just as.
Well, 3 of the 9 localities are, Fairfax City, Falls Church, and Arlington. So we're all sitting right here. So when we talk about LCI at Region 4, it's a non-discussion because everybody, you have 2 sides of the room. And and even Fairfax, because they're usually at like 0.67, 0.69. So, they would like for it to be better, but they're not going to fight to all of a sudden lose more.
Right.
Yeah.
They're not going to go to 75.
It's a tough
on our behalf.
discussion.
All right.
Northern Virginia, everybody has more staff
Yeah.
than the standards of quality asks.
Well, and the fact of the matter is, to Ms. Carney's point, every single school division staffs above the standards of quality. But we really staff above them. I mean, in Northern Virginia with the class size ratios, the ESOL population, those things.
Okay. All right, any other questions, thoughts, observations? All right, let us now move to, and I would appreciate if you would talk about any budgetary implications of the next item on our agenda here, the FCC TV.
We are really still a work in progress with FCC TV. There will be a position posted. It'll be under new management coming shortly. But as far as how it will impact our budget, I expect it to be a conversation that probably the city will want to have with us. Mr. Shields, if by chance it did end back on under school management, as far as oversight, if you remember at one time we had joint oversight. City and schools were trying to do it together. That wasn't working. So the school board said, we'll toss it your way. The city has had the management for the last 2 years. They would really, really like the schools to take it back. So that will be a discussion during the budget. Now, Mr. Shields has said that he's very agreeable to setting up some sort of community fund that is not school or city, that is clearly labeled, that wouldn't show up and look like it's operational money, because that's what we got into when we were giving it away, is it kept counting against our operations, and it looked like we had $300,000 that we really didn't have. It was running a television station. So that's where we are right now, and over the coming, because it's being reorganized right now, we have a lot of things to work out, but they would like the station to be under our management. The Access Board would like it to be under the school management. Some of our staff would like to be using that station more. We have a proposal right now from Peter Laub, who wants to do a daily news show at the high school. We've had it at the middle school. We've had trouble over the years getting it off the ground. But as Ms. Carney has said, we should be able to use the studio because it's in our building without taking over management of the station. So it may become a liaison meeting discussion again, I would expect in the next month or so. So that's where we are on that right now.
Okay, any questions about the TV station? I guess the only question I would have is, if we didn't have something like this and we were starting it up now, would it look like what we have?
Question.
If we were starting it brand new, no, it would look nothing like what it has looked like. But I think if you talk to, John Brett and some people that have a vision for it, I think it has great potential, and I always have thought it has great potential. It could look very, very different, but there's no plan right now to do that. So until I think, whether that's the tripartite, 3 groups figuring out what that looks like, what's the content that we produce, what is the expectation that you get out of the station, if we're going to have a class that operates down there, every day for high school students for film studies, are we going to produce things that are more PR oriented, I guess you could say, just public relations for city and schools, which we've only probably produced 1 or 2 things in the last 4 years that were of that nature, and we would like to see them produced monthly. So like even on the GMMEH project, even if it was a 3-minute clip about the process, that we could run on the web and was done professionally. So has a lot of potential, but the planning has not taken place. And until we know who's actually running the station, that would probably be the next thing, is really figuring out what it's going to look like.
Okay, all right, well, thank you.
Welcome.
All right, now let us move on to, we talked about this a little last week, the FY17 CIP. You had some things you were going to come back to us about, so.
Right. And I will say, I didn't make any changes to the document. I'm just bringing back the answers to your questions, and then you can let me know if you want to have something reflected in here. The first question that was asked was, if we were to look at Mount Daniel just going in and doing the sprinkler system on all of the old section while we're kind of in limbo right now there, what would that cost be? We would want a budget item of around $700,000 in order to make sure that got done. $500,000 is for all of the, you would need new ceiling grids once you rip them out in the old sections. It would be running the sprinkler system, upgrading all of the fire alarm, system in order to coordinate. And then that additional funding is because you would have to do a major emptying all of the classrooms before summer. We would have to also get storage in order to empty that much of the building and pay for storage. And then, of course, before we move back in, it would take a huge deep cleaning because I don't know if you've ever been in the buildings when the ceilings are all ripped out, but they're just nasty. So it would be at least $700,000 that we would want to either put in the CIP if we are looking for modernization money, or, are we talking about using part of that Mount Daniel funding that's already there?
Okay.
So that was the first item, and then the second item was what's happening at George Mason in regards to HVAC. If you remember, we had the quote that's attached in here, just to let you know what's going on there. All of the units date back to about 1992, so they're 24, 25 years old, and currently we have, for instance, the one that failed in the auditorium, it was totally rusted out. So they really feel like if they actually started going in and looking inside the units, it's probably what's going on with all of them. So, to Sevy's words, he just says, we're on borrowed time. So can we make it 4 or 5 years? There is no guesstimate. It's when they fail, and if they fail the way the one on the auditorium did, and you get in and you start trying to repair and they're all rusted out, it's just, you can't fix it, so it takes a new unit. Then he also pointed out, he said he's also concerned about the boilers. Was it last year we lost a boiler at GM? I think it was,
Yes.
about 150,000, was it?
And actually, what we did, it actually, the tank had rusted through, but we were actually able to get the price down to about $40,000.
Well, that's way better than what I
Yeah,
thought.
than replacing the whole.
But the
boiler.
boilers are all dating back to 1960s, 70s, and 80s in the building. So he wanted to just draw that to our attention. And then the other thing he said, I just want to throw in, there's 3 failing elevators. So, because we have...
And that's been for as long as I've been here.
Yeah. So it really is, and that's, trying to get that building, the life of that building to last much longer than that. And again, I think it goes back to why that GM-MEH project we're working so hard on is so important. Otherwise, we're going to be investing a tremendous amount of money to keep this building going. I was coming in the door last week, and one of the tiles was just like laying there, and it's just there, issues around the building that we're trying to keep going, but it's old. So that's where we were on the HVAC issue. And so if there's something I need to add to the CIP based on either one of those, that's where I would need direction tonight, so I could get it in here for us.
Okay.
So the amount that you've put in for the failure eventuality, do you feel that covers what you just discussed, or it's?
For the failures at GM, like in...
Yes.
No, because the quote starts at $6.5 million just for HVAC, and I've been told that could double depending on what happens inside the building. And that quote was from last year, and every year these costs go up. So it's actually one of the addendums that's in here. And
Right, but.
so we haven't put...
Since it's an addendum in the plan, is that to be interpreted that we're making a request for some part of that, or all of it? Or I think we need to clarify what.
Right. It's actually attached.
What that addendum is about.
It's actually attached as part of the high school and why we're requesting $100 million for the high school. That's where we've had it connected there the last 2 years.
Right.
And then there is another 400,000 requested. So if one thing goes out, like an elevator goes out, we could at least try to repair the elevator.
Right, that's the quote that either should stay as it is or
Right.
or grow.
Right. And we do have that new land acquisition number in here as well. So that'll be a little bit of a shock, I think, for the city, just because that CIP number will jump.
Other thoughts, questions, observations, proposals? Okay.
Well, the 400K is an elevator.
It's just, what we do is we list it as systems renewal, so it's
Right.
replace, renew, and modernize. So it could be anywhere. The good thing is we're in pretty good place now with TJ, we're in a great place with Thackeray, so it would be something failing at Mount Daniel or the high school, probably. Could have a sewage issue or something at
Roof,
MEH
yeah.
again, or, yeah.
Okay,
Do we have any unit cost items that can help us to figure out where that 400K would go, and give us an idea of, whether we're covering 10% of the eventual problems, or 25%, or 5%?
Well, if we're just talking about the HVAC or the roof, I think the only number you can really look at is to go in and do the entire HVAC, 6.5 million. So, if you're talking about one unit failing, we could find out what one unit cost is, but whether that will be one unit or 5, we don't know. But I certainly could find out the per unit number. And then it depends on one unit, what else they find when they're just doing that one unit. And if they find asbestos, we may be dealing with the entire roof. I mean, you just don't know.
Well, I'd just like to have more of a handle on what the 400,000 potentially covers.
It pretty much covers critical, to be honest with you. I mean, it's HVAC, it is roof, and right now, like modernization money over the last couple of years, tends to be where it is, because it's not bond money. That's money that Richard puts in, and if the roof at Mason, we could go back and look how much we've had to spend over the last just 2 years, but that's usually, it's wherever something's failing. And we invested, how much in the roof last year? Do you remember? Was it? We can send those numbers to you. But that's been one of our greatest challenges, has actually been the roof.
I understand that we put that money in and then we just cross our fingers and close our eyes and hope that nothing happens and that we just spend it in the first place. But I do wonder how to signal to the community and the general government that it may well turn out that we need a bunch more money than that because we have an emergency. I mean,
Right.
I don't know if, explicitly asking for it in the CIP, I don't know if that's the answer, or I don't know how to signal to say, we're not really formally asking for this money, but if something happens.
Right.
It's kind of like the TJ trailers, right? Where we suddenly have this emergency and I had to go back and
Right.
ask.
It's a good
and
example.
It would be nice if they would have some notion that these things are teetering on the edge.
Yeah.
And that we may have to come, and that may be why we use the city reserve, right? Is to replace a roof or do something
well,
like that.
yeah, and I guess I would say that 400,000 serves as kind of an estimate of the likely but not the worst case scenario. That's and so could you add a couple of zeros, or could we squeak by? And it's I analogize to people, George Mason, to our soon to be towed away minivan, where you can put a couple thousand more into it, but at 250,000 miles you reach a point where you're going to pay some big money to get not that much more service life out of it. And I think many of these questions have been trying to do an imperfect job of explaining, here's the range, and here's some experience we've had, and be advised, we don't know what's going to happen, but it could be expensive, so.
Maybe that's a gang of 8 conversation to have and decide how to communicate that.
Your reference right now to the addendum, does it tie back to something specific? It doesn't appear to tie to the 400,000.
For the HVAC initially, unless we've misnumbered, let me look here. It should be, that 100 million is addendum 1. Let me see if it should be right.
But, yeah, I understand these things are part of the campus renewal. But the question is, how do we tie some of these things to the repair item? And at least I would think maybe asterisking the 400,000 figure, and then indicating that there is an explanation in the addendum of some of the things that this may cover.
Yeah, what it says in the addendum is there's some plan modernization fund. There was plan modernization in 15-16. More is needed for 17 to provide critical funding as needed for several systems renewals, which are end of life. There's great concern that the roof and HVAC at GM are both in bad shape. While this amount of funding does not replace the roof or HVAC, it does allow the school division to do minor repairs and replacements while waiting on the approval of a new high school. So it's tied into that one. And then the one just below that is the quote for the HVAC.
Okay.
And then there's a partial roof replacement that's in here as well, which is just over $1 million.
But
Last year was,
Are you basically saying addendum 2 should be reflected somewhere in here? Because it's not.
It is in that it's indicated as 400,000 in fiscal year 17, and that's the only 400,000 item for fiscal year 17. Yeah,
we can put an addendum like underneath, put the,
Parenthetical sentence.
yeah, we can do that.
too.
Yeah,
yeah.
we can do that.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that would work. So, would anybody care to make a motion with respect to the CIP, if there are no other questions?
I move that this school board approve the FY17 CIP as presented.
Second?
Okay, with that one little,
With the one little
thank you.
fix.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you. Next, we come to item 7.04, the approval of the legislative package. Before I turn it over to Dr. Jones, I will say that Margaret, who was unable to come and who's not feeling well, did say that she had reviewed it and was in agreement with it. With that, I'll hand it over to Tony.
Okay. Mr. Lawrence and newly elected Ms. Gill actually attended the legislative breakfast in Arlington. So, Mr. Lawrence, did you have anything you wanted to share about the legislative breakfast with the group?
No, I mean, it was a good gathering, had a smattering of officials who showed up. I think the key was, there was a lot of talk about red light cameras, or not red light cameras, bus cameras. And, it seems like there's quite a little coalition coming together to fight to get this fixed in Richmond, which is good. And partly it's good because now there are companies who are interested in getting it fixed because they have a dog in the fight, and companies have high-paid lobbyists, so that's always a plus. Other than that, I was just very surprised at the announcement, the expectation that there might actually be more money in the budget. That seemed very surprising and certainly made everybody happy. So, but other than that, we didn't go through our specifics, but Tony presented, so why don't you?
Okay. And this, of course, is put together with Lila Wise, who is our person who carries the flag for us down in Richmond and also works with Alexandria and Arlington. So you'll see some similarities where we try to really be together in Northern Virginia. And then some of these are unique where different school board members have sent items in. The first one is looking at funding and poverty and ELL add-on funding. This is something across the state of Virginia which a lot of school superintendents as well as school boards would like to see is more funding for ELL populations where there is some additional, because we are seeing a lot of growth with this demographic across Virginia. Also, continuation of the full funding of the cost of competing factor. We call for that, every year, just trying to make sure we can keep that. And continuation of the present funding formula of the preschool initiative, because what is happening with preschool across Virginia is that so many school divisions are unable to spend all of their preschool money because they don't have the space to have a preschool. We are actually one of the few localities who do use every little penny that we get. And when they have ran reports, what they have asked for is a school division that could be utilizing perhaps even either more money from another school division instead of having it just go back in the pot. So, okay, we have space after everybody's utilized their funding and there's left over, can we request additional funding because we have space to serve more children? So there's a lot of discussion about preschool and how we can use those funds better across Virginia. Also allowing localities to contract with more private centers in a different way where if they don't have the actual space where they have more flexibility, and that's not my expert area because we don't deal with that issue here. And so for me in Virginia, I can't can't speak much to that. I just know they even talked about that at our legislative breakfast where Alexandria is looking at it from that kind of lens. Looking at providing standards of quality flexibility for local control. And this is looking at items, well, when we're talking about a difficult budget year like this year, and when you look at the SOQ, it may say you need a media specialist at elementary when you have X amount of students. So what this is calling for is, well, maybe instead of a media specialist, we could volunteer staff it with our parents who are willing to do that. We could have a para and then take that position and make it a reading teacher or make it a classroom teacher. So it's just calling for flexibility for the localities to be able to decide in the individual school divisions how best to spend the money that they get for their school division. And that's something that everybody feels pretty strongly about in Virginia. To provide funding to localities with composite range of 7 to 8, and this is what Mr. Sharp was referencing before, to the same funding for a 0.8 as what the 0.7 would get. So it would increase that funding for those that are above 0.7. And that's something, again, those few of us here in Northern Virginia definitely would like to see. To provide additional funding to school divisions to adjust their career and technical education programs to enhance career and workforce ready. But again, all these things are calling for extra funding, so it's challenging. And they kind of go back to, if they would give you local control, then you could do all of these things if they would free up how we want to spend our dollars. Looking at the instructional side, community college credit coordination. And this is really talking about supporting the effort for how high school credits are awarded for community college. And interesting enough, when we were at the legislative breakfast, a lot of what they were talking about in our neighbors, we're already doing here. We have flexibility because the way that what we are allowed to do, especially with hybrid learning, we're already doing it. But a lot of localities are not. So it's not necessarily that flexibility is not there. It's just how they're utilizing their curriculum and instruction, and they're calling for more flexibility, but it really would have to come from the community college, where we've done like a pilot program with our community college and doing some really great things. Looking at advanced placement and international baccalaureate credits issued by Virginia colleges and universities. This is really supporting the effort to require them to actually accept AP and IB exams. You can already go out with all the colleges in Virginia and they'll tell you, it takes a 3 on a biology exam or takes a 4, but this would actually require them to set the standard, which like a passing score, for instance. So if you have a 3 on an AP exam, a lot of universities will say, no, you should have a 4 or a 5. Yet that course, if you have a 3 on an exam with that rigor, IB or AP, and you get a passing score, it's far more rigorous than what you will find in most freshman level community colleges. Yet our students aren't getting that guaranteed credit. So that's about guaranteed credit.
Quick question about that. So it's more looking at the community college level or at...
And four-year institutions, which is a big ask because... Yeah. So it's looking at both. Where there would be, if you basically pass an AP or an IB exam, you would have your guaranteed credit in the state of Virginia.
And you're confident that you can equalize those or normalize them so that a 5 for IB is a 3 for... I mean, I can see that you would get some, that if you've had this much pushback from the higher education community, that you would expect that they would maybe continue using other strategies, like, well, if you get a 7, maybe we'll think about it, but...
I think it's easier on AP because AP is very clear about what passing is. I think it's more difficult at IB, and you probably know more about this than me, but this is...
I will tell you, it's more cut and dry AP than it is IB, of trying to figure out how to assign the credit when they come to universities. Because I will tell you, prior to my last gig, I really didn't know much about IB at all until I got to a little bit more rigorous of a university working at. Did I leave there and have a better understanding of the IB program? But AP, I always knew, cut and dry, varies from university to university of how the AP credits will fall. Most schools will give, may not count for the class, but they might give elective credit for it. versus at a 3, versus, you know, the 4 or 5, you might get the biology or whatever it is credit at that point. So that's the only reason I'm kind of like, you don't know. Like, I think that'll get pushed back from some of the 4-year schools.
Yeah, and it's in our legislative package, it's not in Arlington's. It was a school board member request, so whether or not it gets traction, I agree, it's a very difficult thing, and part of it's financially driven. If they started giving all those credits, they would lose a tremendous amount of funding, and I think that's why it's changed over the years.
It is totally financially
Right.
driven, because I've known numerous kids who will take a course and at the community college level and try to transfer it in, and they won't get the credit for it because the department will say, well, we want ours is different from what you got there, and you have to do this one. And I will tell them, you're not going to be happy, because you're going to walk in there and you're going to see this is exactly the same class I just took, but I'm taking it all over. I'm like, just look at it as so you'll get a good A out of it because you've been there before. But that's it's true how it works.
Well, this is hopefully pushing the universities, though, to regularize their practice so that it has a level playing field for the two different.
I agree. I think that it's definitely not. It's more schools are now doing IB that I think it may get there, but definitely there is not a level playing field IB versus AP at all, because most universities will work with AP a lot quicker and easier than IB, and then they'll push for IB programs. It's a little bit more difficult to get individual credit for IB courses versus if you do the full diploma. Most schools will be quicker to recognize full diploma students versus students who've taken individual courses, and it definitely is then there's the difference between the higher level and the standard level IB course that they'll look at with regards to that as well, of how they award credit for it. So it is not any path to go at all.
Well, I would also add that in terms of like higher level and standard level courses, that if you do take the IB diploma, you're required to take 3 higher levels, 3 standard levels, and a lot of colleges don't award credit for standard levels, and so in more AP schools, students can take more AP classes and therefore get more credit, when sometimes standard level courses are just as rigorous as AP courses. So there's kind of this disparity.
Yeah.
I think it's a good jump. I think it's something that's good too, and good that it's in our package. But coming from the field and knowing, I think that's going to be a bit more challenging. But I think it's definitely worth the time to invest in trying to see where we can get in potentially some level of compromise there, maybe.
This is something I'd expect some of our neighbors to support. I know
They would have too.
when I was at the WABE discussion last January, where Karen Garza was the host at Bailey's Elementary School at Seven Corners, she went into a long discussion of their review that came out with their portrait of a graduate. And they wanted to have a very systematic approach like IB, where you would have the inquiry-based learning model. And everybody, after she spoke, was saying, oh yeah, we want to be there too. And I think it's at least trying to give IB that kind of recognition, where I think in some AP courses that approach is there, but in many others it's not.
Okay.
The next item is school calendar, which this has been on here at least every year I've been here, and asking for that flexibility in the school calendar, which would allow us to start school before Labor Day. And I'm not hearing any discussion about it this year at all. I think everyone fought such a hard battle last time that they're focused on other issues, but doesn't mean it won't come up. And Falls Church School Board, again, the reduction of state mandated testing is in here for us with standards of learning to comply with only those assessments required. And that, again, could change the state of Virginia with reauthorization, so we're watching and trying to figure out what that actually means for testing. But Virginia has done a good job of trying to reduce the testing, as you know, over the last year or two. So there is very forward thinking from the VDOE and our state superintendent about having more performance-based assessments, really more flexibility. So I've been in some discussions over the last 12 months that were very, very positive about a different way of how we could meet some of that, some of those mandates in assessment. So I'm very hopeful for where the state's actually going. And I think that the state's talking about a lot of progressive having a lot of progressive thought about education and where we'll be. So we have a great state superintendent. Looking at safety, of course, this would allow us to issue those summons for passing a stop school bus to be mailed to the alleged violator, which we, had our program in place for 2 full years, and it went away. And when we were at our legislative breakfast, we were able to share our statistics where the year before we had bus cameras, we had issued 10 tickets. And then that first full year of implementation, and we don't even have cameras on all of our buses, and we're only 2.2 square miles, we had about 450 citations issued, and then the following year it was over 550. So we're one of the few school divisions that actually have data that can help this, and it's gaining traction from all across Virginia. So there were a lot of people looking at the program, wanting to do it, and I think they find those statistics alarming. They actually kind of gasped the other day when I shared the numbers. They're like, oh my gosh, because a place like Arlington has more cut-through streets than we do, and they're a lot bigger, so can't imagine how many they would have. But it looks very positive right now. So student loan refinancing, and Mr. Sharp, you know more about this one than I do, so I might let you just speak to this since you
Well,
asked
Marcus
that this-
Simon did a op-ed in the Washington Post about 6 weeks ago and discussed this in great detail. But boiling it down, it essentially asks for establishing, or as it says here, which I was a little surprised at, reestablishing an education loan authority that would have the power to refinance student loans. So this is a problem that's prevalent throughout the country. It certainly impacts low-income students to a heavier extent than others. Not necessarily in terms of how big their bills are, but in terms of how much of a burden it is to really pay back the loans. So being able to roll them over to a different structure is really important for them particularly.
Okay.
That was our last item.
About the LCI, I don't think for this year, because it's late for this year, but just as a way to think about it for the future, I think most people don't get the LCI. They don't understand it. It's complicated. They don't get a 0.7 and a 0.8 and a 0.6 and all that kind of stuff. And so it occurs to me that maybe an approach for us and for Northern Virginia, rather than that of saying, well, if you have a 0.8, you should be treated like a 0.7. I think the state law in Virginia says that the state will finance 45% of school expenditures across the state, and we get 11 or 12% of ours. And so I just wonder if a better way to communicate it that everybody can get is a floor, instead of saying, treat a 0.7, say 45%, but no less than 25% or 30% of any jurisdiction's expenditures, is a way that parents and communities and people who aren't in the weeds of it could understand the difference, right? Because if we get 12%, that's about 25% of what the state's committed as a benchmark, right? So anyway, that's just a comment for future discussion as a way that, I think the problem with the LCI is nobody understands it that's not in it. And so it's hard to get the community, I mean, God love Dave Snyder, right? It's hard to get the community engaged and understanding. It's hard to talk to lawmakers about it and other folks, so that's just a.
I agree, being able
observation.
to market it better, which,
That's what I do.
that's, yeah, tremendous. I wish we could put it in terms that citizens would understand better and the legislators understand.
So maybe for next year.
Okay.
It's not going anywhere this year, so
Right.
we all know.
Okay, I have a motion.
I'd move that the school board approve the 2016 FCCPS legislative package as presented.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. All right, Dr. Jones? on-
Is that one?
Still gonna,
Oh, was that the one? It should be off. Let me look. Yours not come on?
let me double check here.
It's just not refreshing.
What's your,
Yeah, next is construction update.
all right. For some reason, I'm not refreshing on my
5.06.
screen. All right, Dr. Jones, construction update.
Just a quick note that we did send out a Mount Daniel update, which answered a lot of the community questions last Friday, and I've had good feedback from that. Those questions are all generated from the group we pulled together just to get feedback from, and then I sent them kind of, these are the things that I'm getting ready to address. Can you think of anything else? So that was very helpful, and we'll do this periodically as we move through the process. But there really is not, much beyond what we sent out on Friday. And it's quite a lengthy update. And then we put it in morning announcements again for those people that don't like to subscribe to that.
Thought that was well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, now we come to item 7, the superintendent's report.
Just a couple of items. We did have the strings concert last week, and that's just so precious to see at TJ. All the little ones, the beginners, or they're kind of squeaky, and then the instructor is just fabulous. And the end of the night, where she actually did a solo, and it was like just being at this amazing concert. But it was wonderful, I think, for the kids to see her model. We don't do enough of that, I think, and it was just fantastic. The band concert, as always, was phenomenal as well. And because I know the band concert goes for a really long time, I actually was able to go to the strings first, over and done with the little ones, and still make a lot of the band concert. So that was fabulous. And we did host from Conewago, I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, Pennsylvania today, a team of about 20 educators and the superintendent, senior folks. They had teachers from second grade through high school just coming out to learn from our school system about personalized learning. So that was really fun, I think, for the teachers and for the principals. They enjoy hosting those visits because we also learn from each other. But and they visited today MEH, GM, and then we only had time for one elementary, and they went to Mount Daniel to see the little ones. And they were doing a girls coding club today, which was fun for them to be able to see the little kindergartners all coding. So, and then our robotics was undefeated this weekend, and this is actually the smaller robot. This is our first year that we have done the smaller version, and it's actually it's a lot more manageable when you don't have space, which is they have found in the library. They have a section that is set off for their whole, I want to call it their competition area, but in the library they actually can run the whole robot floor, and those competitions are exactly the same as the big ones. It's just they don't take up as much space, but they were amazing this weekend and went undefeated all day long, and so they have qualified for state. And then, of course, our Cyber Patriots have been doing well also, which is great to see because that's fairly new for us. So we're doing lots of great things right now.
I met the woman from Northrop Grumman who coordinates the Cyber Patriot program.
Oh, wow.
And told her how our kids were embracing it
Yes.
and how well they were doing, and that we had a team that was all girls.
Wow. And I might just add, you also reminded me just with Northern Virginia, met with Dr. Rawls, the new
he great?
president of Northern Virginia Community College last week, and great. He was really phenomenal, and he really wanted to know what they could do better, and So, I mean, he went back, and we already have, working on the next meeting, because we just want more opportunities for our kids. And he was just so receptive and saying, well, we'd really like more hybrid, because that operates in a silo here where your regular kind of ed's over here. And but it was a great, great meeting, and we're glad you're going to be on that board when you leave this one. So
He's terrific.
Yeah.
He's very open-minded.
that's all for me.
Right, well, thank you, Dr. Jones. Now we come to board and student liaison comments. We will start by the people who weren't here last time. So, Mr. Charpentier, why don't you kick things off?
All right, well, while I was absent, the students, after a few speed bumps, finally met the architect. And just I'll give you like a couple suggestions that they had, just food for thought. They wanted a lot of natural light in the building, so that kind of went along what I've seen at the community visioning session. They also had this idea of movable furniture, so I think that that's something you've talked about too. And also this sort of separate area for studying and an area for projects. In the library, there tends to be a lot of talking because it's more cooperative, so some students have trouble finding quiet spaces. But they still can by going into teachers' classrooms, but if there's a dedicated space for it, they would like that. So those are just like 3 of them that I thought I could highlight. And then I was supporting the Quiz Bowl team, where I know your daughter Alice was part of the team, and they did tremendously well. She won both games, so hats off to them.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you. Mr. Webb.
Thank you very much. I'll take my couple minutes here to say some great words of wisdom. Well, wait on one. I'll start with one here. Mr. Sharp, it has been a true pleasure actually working directly with you over the last 2 years on the school board. We have worked together during my time on council and dealing with school issues over that time and a few other things. So it's been a pleasure to actually to work with you, sitting next to you, getting your wisdom about what has been going on with the school system for such a long period of time. Your wisdom and insight have been, I think, great for not only myself but a lot of folks who have come through the school boards over the years, of your knowledge that you had of issues that have happened in the past, and being able to bring that to the forefront so that we are not necessarily missing something that may have been talked about before, and at least kind of bring us up to speed on those type of things have been very good. Your commitment to the community is none other than what you are a true person who likes to work in the community, be it here at Falls Church and working outside of the community with the Partnership for Youth that represents a little bit larger than just our community. Commitment to young adults, it's been something that I have seen you do for years, and appreciate the fact that you give of your time to be able to work with young adults and help them become strong young men and women as they move on into their different parts of their lives, and as they move on to college and university and being productive citizens. So I know that you'll continue to be involved, and I look forward to continuing to work with you as we go forward with many other ventures. I hope that I will see you at visioning sessions, seeing you at talking about budgets still, kind of letting us know what your views and things are on those things. But also, hopefully, that you and Barbara will have a little time to do some stuff too along the way, as you have a little bit more time opposed to giving up Tuesday evenings at 7 o'clock on a consistent basis. So you'll have a little bit more time to do those things with your own family and spending time with grandkids and those type of things. But it's been a pleasure over these 2 years and beyond that working with you. And Ms. Carney, it has been just as good working with you, even though, in our early years on my council side, we've had our headbutts but you with budgetary things. And so switching sides and being with you is a much better place to be with you instead of against you. But no, it's been great working with you over the years, because again, for that firm commitment that you have of education, and what you've been able to accomplish during your time on the board has been great. Even when you've tried to slip off the board a couple of different times, but you saw that the need was still there to continue the work. You hung in there until this time you said, I'm putting my foot down and I'm out of here. But again, I know we're still expect to see you around and being active and involved as well. And we'll have a few more baseball times come this summer when baseball season goes in. I always think about my first interaction with you when you were actually announcing running, when you came to the Democratic Committee meeting. That was my first interaction of meeting you at that point then, but it's been a great honor and pleasure to serve with you, to be adversaries at times, but it was all in the sense of doing what's best for not only our students but our community as well. And looking forward to continue to working with you on doing other ventures, and we'll continue to see you being involved as well in the community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webb.
That's it.
Mr. Ankuma,
Well,
we're just, we're at the school board meeting, it's Monday evening.
Oh, that, yeah.
We're doing board and student liaison comments. I just wanted to catch you up. I will give you a chance to collect your thoughts, and then we will come back to you. But
Thank you.
welcome, I'm glad you could make it. Mr. Lawrence?
Okay. First, let me channel my inner Margaret. She sent in some notes about ESOL. First of all, she said the student liaison is forming a buddies program to help assimilate new ESOL students to the high school, and the activities there is a way to help the kids feel welcome and get them involved, which is a great idea because you can set up all the programs you've got, but if you don't have a buddy to talk to and do things with, it's not as much fun. So she said the student liaison is fantastic, and she described them as lucky to have her on the board, on the committee. So on athletic boosters, now that football season's over, Margaret's, I think, getting more rest. Sumi getting a long-awaited new field and track. In the meantime, winter sports, basketball, ice hockey, scholastic bowl, wrestling, swim and dive are in full swing. And she just reminds everybody you can get the full game schedules at masonathletics.org. So she'll have more things next time, but she just wanted us to pass those on because she's feeling very, very, very sick, and just decided that it was probably a better idea, probably better for us if she stayed home and just slept. Okay, a couple things for me. I'm missing the Fall Search Education Foundation, which is meeting right over there, and so I'll have a report on what they did last time, or what they did this time, next time, if that makes sense. We talked about the legislative breakfast. I went to the second town hall as well as the first one, and it was very interesting that there were a lot of new faces that I had not seen. Not just people I hadn't seen at meetings, and I recognized them from being around, but genuinely new faces. It wasn't a huge turnout. I mean, it was the start of our 70-degree weekend 2 weeks before Christmas, but it was good. There was a good,
Yeah.
15, 18 people there.
I think at least that many.
And then the mayor and the vice mayor showed up, so it was very good. Other than that, we did have a special education advisory committee meeting, and got some work done. There was one program called Smile, Don't Stare, which is, I'll circulate it. It's basically kids saying, see me, not the chair. So I'd rather have you, smile at me and, don't ask about my chair, ask about me. So it was very good. And just one announcement to all of you. I've been struggling, and Melissa back there knows, she heard me venting frustration a few weeks ago about how we get more teacher input, and I've talked with all of you, it's, we go out there for the budget, and everybody's glad we come, but we generally get out there just for the budget. So I've had something rolling around my head. There's a lot of space in there. And so what I'm going to do starting January is commit to every week, just go to a school on a specific day at a specific time, and whoever wants to come and talk can talk. Not, an hour and a half or 2 hours, but, be there for half an hour. And I think what we'll do is if we keep up that schedule, we can rotate schools, but also we won't hear from the same people we hear all the time. I mean, I don't know about meetings you've had at schools in the spring, but it's 70% the people you saw the spring before. So what I'm hoping is if we do this, we'll hear from more people, and not just the people who happen to be, mad at the time or really happy at the time, but just people who might have something to say. Obviously, once it's finalized, I'll circulate what the plans are, but it's, let's say Monday it's probably going to be 7 or 7:30 for most schools, and the idea is just go there. If people show up, they show up. If not, we can move on. Anybody who wants to come is obviously welcome, but the idea is just to listen. Well, not to listen more, to hear more, because we'll have more people talking to us. And Michael, I was going to tell you in advance, I met with Dave Sikora, who's the head of Peak, just this afternoon, because I talked with Tony about it, and I want to talk to Peak to pretty much say, is this a good idea? And, the answer was, yes, this is great. This is something, honestly, they're planning on talking about tomorrow at Peak, because they've been trying to figure out a way to get more engagement. And Dave came and he spoke to us last week. So I finally kicked myself into gear. So no specific details, but just letting you know I'm going to kick that off first week of January.
If more than 2 board members attend one of those, does it need to be a public meeting?
If more than 2 intended to participate, then yes, it would need to be a noticed public meeting. So
Yeah, I have a list of questions for Tom in terms of things like that. So yeah, we need to work out the logistics, and if it comes
Do it
down
in
to
twos.
well, it go in twos, or frankly, he hit it if more than 2 participate. So you can have 3 there as long as one doesn't talk. But we don't want to play fast and loose with the rules. But if it comes down to I'm not there every week because a whole bunch of other people want to go, and you 2 want to go, then I don't have to go. But the whole idea is just
So then
to
go a
get us
consistent
out there
schedule
more.
for us to.
Yeah, I think it'll just help if we know, every time on that day, I've got this as an opportunity. And for me, it's got to be early in the morning, because I can't get out, of the office at 2:30 to get back for a 3:30 dismissal. And I think for most of you, it's probably the same. So just the thought is out there, and we'll just make it happen and see how it works. But, it's a frustration I think everyone here has expressed at one time or another. So that's my attempted solution. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Sharp?
Okay, the second meeting of the Health and Wellness Committee was last Thursday night, and we had a really good chance to receive information. There weren't enough really there for a full quorum. The chair of the committee is pediatrician Selena Dakin, and she had business she was called into and wasn't able to attend, but very ably conducted by Susan Dimmock, who is the vice chair, and we heard some information from a teacher and from the school's representative from the health department talking about head lice. And there has been sort of the usual experience with that. Some 20-some kids at Mount Daniel, and then some others at TJ, but fortunately not going into the higher grades at this point. And then we also heard about safety from Sevi Padilla, and he went through several aspects of that having to do with the new school and with the challenges of the current school, including all the different issues we have with the many doors. And he did say that he felt that they have a very good system of cameras that allows for a very wide range of observation and safety from that aspect. And he discussed that, well, he was informed, however, that there are some dead spots for cell phone transmission in our schools, particularly in the, as Vicki Gallagher related, in the athletic area where she is. And so there's some challenges there in terms of communication to try to overcome. And I do want to thank all those who participated on the Family Life Education Committee for many years. Most of them have moved over, and urge others to come and join. I've talked with a few people who may be interested, but certainly that committee can use additional people. Next meeting will be in February, and they plan another meeting in March and then in April. The other liaison role that I've had for eons, it seems, is the Partnership for Youth, and that is ending because that organization is winding up. Fairfax has withdrawn their support for it. They've really taken over the functions of the Partnership for Youth with a staff-level group called the Successful Children and Youth Policy Team. And I know our staff have opportunities to participate in that. And so that's how that is ongoing. So, John, no liaison for that after the first of the year.
Wow.
And I want to thank those who helped to put on the Education Foundation's holiday party. It's a tremendous atmosphere, boatloads of food and refreshment, and a great time to share with a really great group of people, probably about, 40 or so in attendance at one time or another. And they have a great ongoing program planning for their big fundraiser, which occurs in the spring, and I'll very much miss their. Well, I've participated mostly in their run the last few years because we're that's more of our speed of an event than the casino night. But we look forward to staying involved with them, and I do want to thank definitely my wife for all the support that she's helped with the foundation, with the health committee, or the FLE committee as it was previously, and just in so many ways providing the support that I could not have done anywhere near the service without her aid, assistance, and moral support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp. Ms. Carney.
I think tonight.
Thank you. I will echo Mr. Sharp's remarks about the Falls Church Education Foundation party last night. It was quite a wonderful affair, and there was a good turnout. Mr. Webb was there, Mr. Sharp. So it was a good time aside, but I would call out Gabby Sandoz for phenomenal food, and Brian Williams and Andy Rankin for opening Big Ed up to us. Missing basketball games tonight. There is a lot going on. College decisions of one sort or another are starting to roll in. I wish everybody good luck with that as the process unfolds. And I know there's still plenty of applying left to do. And that's it for now.
I'll just,
Oh, yes.
I can leave.
Your tardiness.
I know.
Those who are late do not get fruit cups.
So, I was at the chamber board meeting the other day, and the big topic there was the Mason Road project and its implications for business, and I guess tangentially for us and kids as well. So, we're monitoring that, and the chamber's supporting all of that. Last Mason High School PTA, you mentioned college applications. I think it came up as to when to start having the conversation. Folks were going, given what juniors or rising seniors have the summer, to do, it would be helpful if those conversations are had not in September, early in the senior year, but could we have them sort of late or at the end of the junior year, so that momentum carries through the summer. And I experienced it myself, where I kept telling my daughter, you start thinking about your app, and then we run into that wall towards Christmas. So that came up. Anyway, they're working that, and they're also looking forward to their all-night grad and all the good stuff that they do. GT meeting is happening right now, so nothing to report there, but I believe the committee is using this year, or at least these first few months, to sort of fine-tune their what I call their raison d'etre, why they're, who's a GT kid, and obviously discuss resources that sort of match that with who do we define as a GT kid, or who's that pool, and what can we have, how do we get them the resources that they need within the constraints that we have. So those conversations are ongoing. Peak, I guess that's been beaten up enough, so we'll be there tomorrow.
I won't be there.
We have a pending item. I think I called you the last peak meeting, something about the retirement plans and some funding.
And that's been resolved.
That's been resolved.
It has.
Okay, so
Favorably
we can
for
let,
all.
We can let them know that that's
Yes,
been
yes.
resolved. So we'll do that.
Did you give me or something written on that? Okay.
Okay. Well, I obviously haven't put in my 2 cents to our outgoing members, and I'll keep it very brief. Kieran, you're the older brother I guess I haven't had since I came to the country, because I remember moving into the Edward Jones office in April 2003, and the first letter I get from somebody in the city was from Kieran Sharp, inviting me to join the Education Foundation. So we go back that far, and he's always been there trying to guide me along, whether it was the chamber, whether it was the daycare advisory board where he was liaison for it. So I really appreciate that. And Kieran, I promise we will do golf soon. When the weather gets better. I've got the shoes.
It's not going to get much better than this.
This is what I need you to explain.
And when my game gets better.
Oh, yeah.
To Susan, I can't believe she's leaving. And Susan and her able partner, our former treasurer, Kathy Kay, stiff-armed me into this position. This is the story. I'm sticking with it. I just want Susan to know I know where you live and I know where you work. And I drive by your car every morning. So if you see a new scratch on it, I'm not saying. But thanks for all the support. But we'll come back to you for anything we need. So
Yes,
just
you
be
can.
prepared to see us more often. But thank you both for all your guidance and your counsel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ankuma. All right, now we come to item 9 on the agenda, the closed meeting. So, would somebody care to read us into closed meeting?
You can do it if you want.
Thank you, Ms. Carney.
Pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, I move that the board convene a closed meeting for the following purpose: to discuss or consider the identified subject matter. Personnel under Section 2.2-3711A1, in particular, advisory committee appointment. Oh, we're not going to do that.
That'd be great.
Never mind that. And legal matters pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A28 for the discussion or consideration of records excluded from the Freedom of Information Act's disclosure requirements pursuant to subdivision 11 of Section 2.2-3705.6, which describes, among other things, confidential documents provided pursuant to the Public-Private Education Facilities and Infrastructure Act of 2002, specifically for the George Mason, Mary Ellen Henderson Campus Project, and legal matters under Section 2.2-3711A7, in particular, consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, in particular, the Mount Daniel Project, and pending litigation involving the Special Ed Advisory Committee, and further that member-elect Aaron Gill be allowed to participate in this closed session.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Carney, and thank you, Mr. Sharp. Okay,
Mr. Ankuma.
Aye.
Mr. Castillo.
Aye.
Ms. Carney.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Sharp.
Yes.
And Mr. Webb.
Yes.
Great.
All right, thank you.
And